Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're cutting through the noise, really getting into the heart of Ghana's big governance and economic challenges right now. We're talking a Chief Justice fighting for her career, pretty serious fraud claims at the Washington, D.C. embassy, a major political party, trying to figure out its future after an election loss. And then there's the government trying to tackle high prices and get young people into jobs, but while running into some deep-seated problems. So our mission here is to unpack all this for you. We're using your source, this detailed criticality analysis from the Center for Economic Governance and Political Affairs, covering late June 2025. We'll pull out the key insights, give you that shortcut to understanding how policy, justice, politics, and the economy all connect in Ghana. We'll touch on, I think, 6 governance themes and 5 economic ones.
That's right. It's a lot to cover, but it gives a really good snapshot. Expect some, maybe, aha moments along the way.
Okay, let's jump straight in. This situation with Ghana's suspended Chief Justice, Her Ladyship Justice Gertrude Torkornoo. It sounds incredibly dramatic. She made this very emotional public appeal on June 25th, right, after being suspended by President Mahama based on 3 petitions.
Yes, and she really laid out some significant grievances. It's not just her job on the line, it's her reputation, her pension. It really brings up questions about the whole process. She started by saying the committee looking into her case failed to even recognize her lawyer just because she wasn't physically present at that moment. So essentially, proceeding without her legal representation.
Wow, okay. That's a big claim right there.
And it gets more fundamental. She argues the committee is supposed to inquire under the Constitution, Article 146(7), but instead they're using high court litigation rules. And even then, she says they're not applying those rules consistently. It's like they're treating it as a trial, but maybe not following all the trial rules either.
So a procedural mess, according to her.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
She also stated she never got formal copies of the petitions or the president's initial, prima facie determination.
Yeah.
Wasn't even told the specific charges clearly. And get this, the people who actually made the petitions, they weren't called to testify. So no chance for cross-examination.
Wait, the petitioners didn't testify. How does that work?
Exactly. And the petitions themselves apparently weren't formally admitted as evidence. She said only some public officials were subpoenaed, and they had limited knowledge of the actual complaints. Beyond the legal points, she described feeling quite isolated, barred from having family support there, subjected to thorough searches. She felt it violated the proper protocol for a Chief Justice.
Wasn't there something personal about the location, too?
Yes, the venue, Adi Lodge. She mentioned it was a stark reminder because her uncle, Major Sam Ockel, was tragically killed there in 1982, along with 3 high court justices. A very painful connection.
Goodness, that adds another layer entirely.
And she didn't shy away from suggesting a political motive. She pointed to a 2022 statement from the current president, who was a leading candidate back then, basically saying the judiciary's leadership needed changing to repair its, quote, broken image.
Okay, so she's raised serious concerns about the process. What about the substance? The actual allegations against her? Did she address those?
She did, head on. For the Daniel Ofori case, he's one of the petitioners. She explained she transferred it because the judge handling it had a family crisis, needed to travel. Seems straightforward enough.
Okay.
On the travel and misappropriation claims, she called them frivolous, said the judicial service policy allows 2 trips a year with per diem for one other person. She took one with her husband, one with her daughter, and accounted for all the funds, retired the impresses both times.
Right. Standard procedure, she claims.
And she argued most claims were case-related, tied to her judicial decisions, which Article 127 indemnifies her for. Her administrative calls, like recommending judges for the Supreme Court, all within the law, she insisted.
And she also flagged a potential conflict of interest with the committee chair, didn't she?
A very pointed one. Justice Pwamang, who chairs the committee, had previously ruled for Daniel Ofori in cases where she, the Chief Justice, had ruled against him. She sees that as a clear conflict. Ofori's preferred judge now leads her removal hearing, essentially.
Okay, quite the defense. So how did the government respond to all this?
Well, the government spokesperson, Honorable Felix Ofosu-Kwaki, held a press conference. He basically said the president followed the Constitution, Article 146, perfectly in starting the process. No breach there.
And the venue, Adu Lodge.
He clarified the committee requested it, not the government, and it was for security reasons, not intimidation. But he also said he couldn't really comment on her specific claims about the hearing itself because it's being held in camera, privately, and it's now fully in the committee's hands.
So it's a complex picture. For you listening, you can see how this really tests the rule of law and judicial independence in Ghana.
Absolutely. And that IMANI report you mentioned earlier summed it up well. It's this mix of constitutional rules, questions about evidence standards, and, potential political undercurrents. The report suggests that while the president might have followed the letter of the law to start the process, the committee's actions within the process, treating it like litigation, the issues with evidence and testimony might actually violate court rules and basic rights.
Which raises that fundamental question. Can the outcome be just if the process itself is seen as flawed?
Precisely. It's a major test for public trust in the whole legal system there.
Okay, let's shift gears now. International relations. This situation at the Ghana embassy in Washington, D.C., allegations of fraud, conflict of interest. What's going on?
Yeah, another complicated one. The Foreign Affairs Minister, Samuel Okudzeto-Ablakwa, went to Parliament with some pretty serious claims back in mid-June. He alleged that an IT officer, Fred Korteng, who was hired around August 2017, actually fiddled with the embassy website.
Fiddled how?
To redirect visa and passport applicants to his own private company, Ghana Travel Consultant, or GTC. The minister said GTC started operating this way in September 2019. Apparently, Korteng was questioned about it in November 2019, but nothing really happened. Then, somehow, GTC got formally contracted in January 2023, which the minister claims violated several public procurement laws.
And the money.
That's the big number. The minister claimed GTC made about $4 million in revenue, and he said not a single cent was due to the Ghanaian government. Though he did mention certain amounts, ended up in an unaudited staff welfare account at the embassy.
$4 million. Wow, but there's always another side, isn't there? What did the former ambassador say?
Yes, H.E. Hajia Alima Mahama, the former ambassador, gave her version just a couple of days later. She basically said the minister didn't fully understand how the embassy worked. She clarified the embassy itself doesn't do deliveries, so it couldn't sublet that service or make money from it. The whole thing started, she explained, because people sending in passports with self-addressed mailers like FedEx, UPS were having loads of problems.
What kind of problems?
Delays, postage wasn't paid correctly, which the embassy ended up covering without a budget for it, wrong addresses, stuff getting returned. It was inefficient.
Okay, so it was causing headaches.
Right. So she asked the IT department, Mr. Korteng, for a fix. He then offered his company, GTC, to handle retrieval and delivery. But, she stressed under strict conditions, it wouldn't cost the embassy anything, and the embassy wouldn't be liable if something got lost or delayed by GTC.
So her argument is it actually helped the embassy.
Exactly. She claimed it significantly improved efficiency and reduced passport delivery problems. And she pushed back hard on the procurement breach claim, saying it was untenable because the embassy wasn't sharing revenue. Applicants paid the government fee online and then paid GTC separately for its optional delivery service.
Okay, two very different stories. But even with those accounts, our source flags a lot of unanswered questions, Wani.
Definitely. Critical gaps remain. Like, where is Fred Korteng now? If fraud is suspected, why was the GTC link still active on the website, even after it reopened?
Good point.
When did GTC even start? Was Korteng running it before he joined the embassy? There are conflicting dates for when he was hired, to 2017 or 2015. And if the embassy didn't offer mailing, why let its official site be a conduit for a private company? What were the exact rules governing this setup? Did GTC only serve Ghanaians?
And the money in the welfare account.
Yeah, why an unaudited staff welfare account? And another big one. The government contracted a company, EMH Global, in 2022 and 2024 to standardize all mission websites. Why didn't the Washington, D.C. mission let them standardize its site?
These are really important questions. That makes you wonder, what does this do to Ghana's image internationally?
It's definitely not helpful. Ghana worked hard to get off that EU money laundering watch list in 2022. But now you have these embassy allegations, plus potential issues with U.S. student visas due to overstays. They're separate issues, of course, but together they just highlight how crucial transparency and accountability are for Ghana's diplomatic missions. It puts a spotlight on things.
Let's switch back home now to domestic politics. The New Patriotic Party, the NPP, they lost the 2024 election, and the source calls their situation existential. What's their plan for renewal?
Well, they've set a date for presidential primaries, January 31st, 2026. And alongside that, they've announced this really ambitious restructuring. They want to elect over 317,000 grassroots officers, polling station execs, electoral area execs. These people would make up about 95% of the delegates voting in the presidential primary.
Oh, huge shift towards the grassroots then.
Absolutely. And there are also proposed constitutional changes meant to be voted on soon at their July 19th delegates conference. These would expand the delegate pool even more, bringing in ministers going back to 2001, all MPs past and present, local government heads, MMDCEs since 97, and party execs from all levels since 92.
Sounds like a major overhaul.
No.
But is everyone in the party on board? Are there bumps in the road?
Definitely bumps. Concerns are being raised. Honorable Patrick Boama, an MP, spoke out in late June about what he sees as inefficiencies in how they're deciding on these early primaries. He pointed out a specific constitutional issue. Article 19 says regional committees must report on their annual conferences within 2 weeks. But, he noted, as of late June, those regional conferences hadn't even happened yet.
So, jumping the gun procedurally.
That seems to be his point. He also said the minority caucus in Parliament, who are directly affected by delegate changes for their own primaries, haven't even seen this alleged Okwe report that supposedly proposes the reforms. And the official notice, the circular with the amendment details. He claimed his constituency office hadn't received it. His overall feeling is that the schedule for primaries and these executive elections is just too much, too fast. It'll overwhelm the party. And you have seasoned strategists like Nana Akumiya saying, essentially, the party won't find unity until after the flag bearer contest is settled. These internal processes could deepen divisions before then.
So, for you listening, what does this internal party maneuvering mean for the NPP's chances in 2028, and maybe even for Ghana's democratic health?
Well, the source analysis is pretty blunt. It calls sidestepping the party's own constitutional rules a zero-sum game, not the way to win back power. It really stresses the need for transparency, sticking to due process, and genuinely consulting with everyone in the party. Without that broad buy-in, these reforms might just cause more internal friction instead of renewal. It potentially undermines the democratic process within the party itself.
Okay, let's pivot now to the economy. Some big challenges there, too. First up, this government plan to get over 100,000 young people post-national service into agriculture.
Yeah, this is a significant initiative announced by the Youth Minister, George Opera-Addo. It involves things like microgrants, help with inputs like seeds and fertilizer, access to land banks, and mentoring. They're even pairing young farmers with experienced cocoa growers. The goals are pretty clear. Refresh the aging cocoa workforce, boost food production, and critically, tackle youth unemployment. The source does acknowledge it's a step in the right direction.
Sounds positive, but the source asks a key question. Will the structure deliver? What are the potential roadblocks?
That's the crucial part. The analysis points to these bigger, broader structural issues that could really limit how successful this program is in the long run. First, just overall funding for agriculture. Public investment is still well below the Maputo 10% target. That's the commitment African nations made to dedicate 10% of budgets to ag. Ghana's not there.
Okay, underinvestment is one thing. What else?
High input costs. Even if these young people get initial support, the whole sector, grain farmers, poultry, processors, they're all battling high costs for things like fertilizer and feed, partly due to relying on imports, price swings, and even smuggling of subsidized inputs.
Right, and financing.
That's another big one. It's often misaligned. Agribusinesses struggle to get loans that fit farming cycles. You might need credit for 2-3 years to invest in trees or irrigation, but loans are often only for 12 months or less.
Doesn't work for long-term growth.
Not really. And finally, market access. The program focuses heavily on producing stuff, but it's light on markets, pricing, and post-harvest integration. These new farmers need stable places to sell their crops and predictable prices to make it sustainable.
So what's needed for this initiative to actually transform things, not just be a temporary fix?
The source is very clear. Real transformation will depend on what happens after the launch. It requires serious investment in the entire agricultural value chain. That means things like better irrigation, reliable transport and storage to cut down waste, more research, better support services for farmers, good data, and making sure different government policies actually work together.
So nesting this youth program within much bigger reforms.
Exactly. Reforms in input markets, land governance, access to credit, logistics, a whole systemic approach. Otherwise, you just hit seasonal targets without really boosting processing, manufacturing, or exports in a lasting way.
Okay, let's tackle another economic hot potato. High prices. We saw the communications minister, Samuel Nartey George, taking on MultiChoice Ghana, the DSTV folks, about their pricing.
Right, and this kind of move really highlights this ongoing tension, doesn't it? Do you try to fix high prices by putting pressure on individual companies, or do you address the underlying economic structures? Our source makes the point that DSTV prices, like many services, aren't just set in a vacuum. They reflect real systemic issues.
Like what?
Things like the volatile exchange rate that hits costs for licenses, satellite stuff, taxes on digital services play a role. Limited competition in the market gives dominant players more pricing power, and just general operating costs. These aren't simply corporate preferences. They're driven by the wider economic environment.
That's a really important distinction. The source compared this to an attempt to regulate cement prices using a legislative instrument, or LI. What was the lesson there?
Yeah, that's a useful parallel. The initial draft of that cement LI actually suggested the government could directly control factory gate prices. But after consultations, they dropped that part. The final LI focused more on transparency, things like publishing price lists rather than direct price setting.
So reality check.
Pretty much. The lesson, according to the source, is that government's ability to directly control prices in liberalized markets, especially where input costs fluctuate wildly, is actually extremely limited. A better role for the state is to strengthen the regulators, promote real competition, and create conditions where the market itself starts to deliver better prices for consumers. Direct pressure often doesn't work long term.
So, for you listening, and for policymakers, what are the more effective ways to bring prices down?
Well, the source suggests several more productive steps, especially for things like pay TV and internet. First, actively strengthen competition. Support local alternatives, maybe local streaming services, make it easier for new companies to enter the market.
Break up dominance, basically.
Right. Second, take a hard look at the tax burden on digital services, review it, maybe rationalize it. Third, actually enforce existing rules, better things like regulations on content bundling, making sure charges are transparent, holding companies to quality standards.
It sounds like focusing on the system, not just the symptom.
Exactly. The source puts it perfectly. Price fairness is a byproduct of good policy, not administrative pressure. Lasting price relief comes when you tackle those structural problems, the exchange rate exposure, the tax system, regulatory weaknesses. That's the harder but more effective path.
We have certainly covered a lot of ground today, a real deep dive, you could say. We've navigated the complexities around the Chief Justice, the allegations at the D.C. Embassy, the MPP's internal struggles, and these critical economic issues of youth employment in agriculture and tackling high prices, all drawn from that detailed criticality analysis report. We've tried to go beyond just the headlines, haven't we? To understand the structures, the different perspectives, the systemic challenges really at play.
Yeah, and you start to see the connections, the underlying themes across these different areas.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up, maybe reflect on that recurring theme that seems to tie all these threads together, the absolute need for strong structures, transparent processes, and sticking to principles, even when it's tough or politically inconvenient. Whether it's the judiciary's integrity, accountability, diplomacy, constitutional rules within parties, or the deep reforms needed for the economy, that need for solid structural solutions keeps coming up. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, about those hidden structures shaping our world and what it really takes to build a society where justice, fairness, progress, they aren't just ideals, but things people experience every single day. Something to think about.